The church fell silent the moment I stepped inside, as if my presence alone could unravel their carefully guarded secrets. Whispers turned to gasps, eyes widened, and the air grew heavy with judgment. I was the ex-wife they'd erased, the ghost they never expected to see at his funeral. But when the lawyer spoke my name, the room froze, and the truth they'd buried was about to change everything. It had been over a decade since most had seen me. And now, here I was, standing at my ex-husband's funeral like a storm no one expected. Elliot Carver, the man I once called my husband, lay in an open casket surrounded by white roses and soft music. His second wife, Sylvia, sat front and center, dabbing her eyes with a barely used tissue. Beside her were my daughters, Leela and Nora. Both avoided my gaze as if I were a ghost. I knew I wasn't welcome. I knew this space had long ceased to be mine. But I didn't come for them. I didn't come to cause a scene. I came because, despite everything he'd done, Elliot had once been my entire world. And part of me, perhaps the strongest part, needed to see this through, to mark the end. As I walked slowly down the side aisle, people leaned into one another and whispered. I heard fragments. Is that her? After all this time, why would she even come? I didn't flinch. I kept my head high, my back straight, and chose a pew near the back, quietly folding my coat beside me. I felt like I was on trial, but I wasn't ashamed. They didn't know the full story. Most never did. The minister spoke, people cried, and memories I'd long buried rushed back. Our first Christmas, the house in Fairhaven, the girls learning to ride bikes, and the silence. The thick, suffocating silence of our final years together. Then, just when I thought the whispers might fade, the lawyer stood at the podium, a tall man in a charcoal suit, briefcase in hand, voice calm but clear. I've been asked to read a section of Elliot Carver's last will and testament, he said. There was a pause long enough to tense every shoulder in the room. He opened the folder, cleared his throat, and read, to Eleanor Prescott. Heads turned in unison. Every pair of eyes, including my daughter's, locked on me. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. No one spoke. No one blinked. In that frozen moment, I realized the real story was only beginning. Before betrayal rewrote my name into whispers, I was simply Eleanor, a wife, a mother, a woman who believed in building a life, not chasing one. Elliot and I were married for 20 years. For most of those, I thought we had something steady, something sacred. We met in our late 20s. I was an art student with paint on my hands and dreams in my pockets. He was a freshly minted business graduate, brimming with ambition. His world was sharp corners and hard decisions. Mine was messy, full of color. We balanced each other, or so I thought. We married in a modest ceremony on a spring afternoon in Fairhaven. The church was small, the cake store bought, but we laughed like kids building sandcastles. We rented a one-bedroom apartment above a bookstore, and I painted while Elliot built his financial consulting business from our kitchen table. We lived on instant noodles and big dreams, always promising that one day things would be easier, and they were, eventually. Elliot's business took off. Clients came, and so did the money. He wore suits that cost more than our early rent. I stayed home raising our daughters, Leela and Nora, while painting on the side, mostly as gifts, sometimes for neighbors, often just to remember who I was. Our home in Fairhaven was something I helped design. The garden bloomed with lilacs because I loved their wild growth. The walls were calming earth tones, every corner holding a piece of our life. Baby photos, handprint paintings, Elliot's first business award, and the clay cat Nora made in 3rd grade. We weren't flashy. We were rooted. For years, my life revolved around my family. I drove the girls to school, made homemade lunches, hosted PTA meetings, taught them how to bake, how to apologize sincerely, how to stand up for themselves. When Elliot came home late, I kept dinner warm. When he traveled, I tucked handwritten notes into his luggage. He didn't always notice, but I didn't do it for praise. I did it because I loved him, because we were building something together. Looking back, I see the imbalance that lived quietly beneath it all. Elliot was the face of our family's success, the one people saw. I was the foundation, the unseen spine. And I didn't mind. I wasn't hungry for recognition. I believed in partnership, not performance. Our daughters grew, and so did Elliot's business. We upgraded from a modest sedan to 2 luxury cars, took family vacations, London, Belize, even a cruise to Norway. On the outside, we were a portrait of success. Neighbors envied us. Friends asked for advice, and I, in my quiet way, was proud of the life we'd made. But now, I wonder if I confused comfort with connection. Elliot grew distant, yet I filled the gaps with understanding. I told myself he was stressed. It was a busy season, he was doing this for us. The truth was, I didn't want to admit what I saw. The man I married was slowly becoming someone I didn't recognize, and worse, someone who no longer saw me at all. Still, there were no screaming matches, no threats of leaving, just a soft, creeping silence that settled like dust on forgotten shelves. I asked about his day. He'd nod. I'd show him a new painting. He'd glance, say, "Niece," and return to his laptop. He wasn't cruel. He was absent, present in body, but elsewhere in mind. Even then, I didn't think we were broken. I believed it was a season, a dry patch all marriages hit. I told myself love was quiet sometimes, that after so many years, comfort was enough. I clung to that belief like a lifeline. I thought we were safe, that we'd made it through the hard parts. I didn't know that while I tended the garden, Elliot was already halfway out the door. The first sign something was wrong didn't come as an argument or a slammed door. It came wrapped in linen and wine on a night meant to celebrate Elliot's latest business award. We were invited to a formal gala downtown, with string quartets, hors d'oeuvre, and ice sculptures shaped like company logos. Elliot was receiving a leadership award for entrepreneurial excellence, and I'd spent the afternoon preparing. I wore a midnight blue dress he'd complimented years earlier, paired with the gold necklace he gave me for our 15th anniversary. I styled my hair the way he liked, soft curls, not too much spray. I wanted to look elegant, not for others, just for him. When we arrived, Elliot separated from me immediately. I told myself it was because he needed to network. It was his night, after all. I hovered near the bar with a glass of white wine, smiling politely at strangers, watching him laugh, clap backs, make toasts. He was magnetic in rooms like that. Everyone gravitated toward him, and I didn't mind the background. I never had. But then it happened. An executive from a partner firm approached to introduce himself to Elliot, who stood nearby with colleagues. I moved closer, smiling, ready to extend my hand. That's when Elliot gestured toward me casually and said, "Oh, that's Eleanor. She keeps me grounded." He said it with a chuckle, like an inside joke. The group laughed. I laughed too, though I didn't feel it. My hand, mid-gesture, floated awkwardly before dropping. She keeps me grounded. Not my wife, not the woman who supported me from day one, not even my partner. Just someone who kept him from spiraling, like a therapist or a potted plant. It was a small thing, a passing remark in a noisy ballroom, but it landed like a stone in my stomach. The rest of the evening, I smiled through it, clinked glasses, posed for photos, applauded his acceptance speech. He thanked his team, his mentors, his late father. He never mentioned me. I told myself it wasn't personal, that he forgot, that acknowledging me in a professional setting might seem off topic. But even as I rationalized, the warmth left my chest. On the drive home, I wanted to say something, not to accuse, but to understand. At a red light, I turned to him and asked gently, "Did you mean what you said tonight about me just keeping you grounded?" He didn't look over, scrolling through congratulatory texts. "It was a joke," he said. "Don't be so sensitive." Sensitive. That word began to follow me like a shadow. Whenever I raised something that hurt, something that made me feel invisible or dismissed, I was sensitive. It was his shield, deflecting without engaging. And each time he used it, I shrank smaller inside myself. The days after the gala were quiet. He returned to work. I returned to the rhythm of home. Laundry, groceries, tidying. But something shifted. I stopped waiting at the window when he worked late. I stopped cooking elaborate dinners. I stopped asking about his day. Instead, I started noticing. Not big, obvious things, but small ones. His cologne changed. He dressed sharper, even for casual errands. His phone never left his side. He laughed more with clients on calls than with me at the dinner table. Still, I didn't accuse him. I didn't want to be the paranoid wife. I told myself it was a phase, a busy season, a dry patch. We'd been through worse. But I couldn't forget that night. That small moment, that offhand comment that warned me I was no longer at the center of his world. I didn't yet realize I'd already been replaced. After that gala, it was as if something shifted in the walls of our home. Not visibly, not violently, but slowly, like a house settling wrong on its foundation. From the outside, we were the same. We kept routines, shared a bed, ate dinner together most nights. But underneath, something essential went silent. Elliot started coming home later. Sometimes he didn't come home at all, citing client dinners, late meetings, or last-minute business trips. I stopped asking for details. Each time I did, he'd sigh and say, "It's work, Eleanor. You know how it is." But I didn't. I used to know his work, helping with presentation drafts, sitting in the back during speeches, ironing his shirts before investor pitches. Now, I wasn't part of that world. I wasn't invited. He no longer needed me in spaces we once built together. One evening, I made his favorite, rosemary chicken with roasted parsnips and mashed cauliflower, lit candles, opened a bottle of red. It was our anniversary, 25 years. He didn't come home. No call, no text, nothing. I waited until midnight. The food went cold, the candles burned low. I blew them out one by one, sat on the edge of our bed in my best dress, and stared at the door like a fool. The next morning, he walked in at 6 a.m., wearing the same clothes from the day before. No apology, just a casual, "Didn't you see my message?" I had to crash at the hotel. Dinner ran long. There was no message. I wanted to scream. Instead, I nodded, walked to the kitchen, and poured his coffee. No sugar, a splash of cream. That's what it became. Quiet surrender. Not because I was weak, but because I was tired. Tired of chasing scraps of affection. Tired of explaining my hurt only to meet eye rolls or indifference. Every time I tried to express myself, he made me feel unstable, a woman unraveling over nothing. He began making digs in front of the girls. At dinner one night, Nora mentioned wanting a gap year before college, and I encouraged her to explore what made her happy. Elliot laughed. See what happens when kids spend too much time with their mother and not enough with structure. Leela chuckled. Nora looked uncomfortable. I stayed quiet. I was losing them too. The girls, once my shadow and joy, grew closer to Elliot. Maybe because he became the fun parent, taking them on ski trips, buying the latest phones. I was the one reminding them to eat vegetables and finish homework. They didn't see how distant he was with me, how he shut me down when no one was around. To them, I was moody, overly emotional, always tired. He started spending weekends away for business, and when home, he was glued to his phone. I'd try to talk. He'd reply without looking up. My words bounced off him like dull noise. It wasn't just the big moments he missed, it was the 1,000 tiny ones. The way he stopped touching me in passing, stopped saying goodnight, forgot I'd started teaching art classes at the community center. He didn't ask how they went. He didn't ask about me at all. Sometimes, I'd sit on the bathtub's edge and cry silently into a towel so no one would hear. Not because he yelled, he never raised his voice. It was worse, he erased me slowly, expertly, until I questioned whether I'd ever been seen to begin with. I'd stare at my reflection and wonder, when did I stop being his person? When did I stop being a person at all? Yet I stayed, because I believed in vows, in seasons. Because I told myself if I tried harder, he'd come back. But love isn't something you carry alone, and I was already carrying everything. It happened on a Sunday afternoon, the kind that should have felt sacred, or at least ordinary. We were hosting a small backyard brunch for Leela's engagement. Nothing extravagant, just close friends, a few family members, finger foods, and champagne flutes clinking under soft jazz from the patio speaker. I'd spent the week preparing, polishing silver, setting the outdoor table with care, arranging fresh market flowers. I loved it, not for hosting, but because it made people feel seen, celebrated. I believed joy was in the details. Elliot didn't offer to help, but I didn't ask. By then, I'd stopped expecting him to notice the labor behind beauty. He arrived that morning in khakis and a navy button-down, freshly shaved, smiling like he hadn't missed every other dinner that month. Leela hugged him tightly, glowing with excitement, and I glimpsed the father she adored. Nora arrived shortly after, quieter, always observing. I busied myself in the kitchen, carrying out fruit platters and mini quiches. I laughed when prompted, mingled as expected, and avoided hovering near Elliot. We'd perfected coexisting without connection. But I wasn't prepared for what came next, nor how effortlessly it would slice through what little dignity I had left. Toward the afternoon's end, someone tapped a glass for a toast. It was Caleb, Leela's fiancé, a sweet, nervous young man who adored her. He said kind words about family and love, then turned to Elliot and me. And of course, thank you to Mr. and Mrs. Carver for hosting. You two are such an inspiring couple. Everyone clapped. I smiled, though that familiar knot tightened in my stomach. Elliot raised his glass and chuckled. Well, if Leela turns out half as smart as her mother, and hopefully twice as steady, I'll consider that a win. Laughter followed, not loud, but enough to sting. Hello. Thanks for watching and being part of this journey. If you enjoy story like this, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support means the world. Now let's dive into the story. A few chuckles, an awkward giggle from Sylvia. Yes, that's Sylvia, his colleague, invited as a guest of a guest. She stood behind him, holding a mimosa, wearing the same shade of lipstick I used to wear. I froze. It wasn't the words that hurt most. It was the ease, the practiced sarcasm, the performance. I was just another character in his story. The uptight wife, the oversensitive homemaker who should be grateful for acknowledgement. I caught Nora's eye. She looked away. Then I did something unexpected. I excused myself from the table and walked into the house. Not dramatically, not with tears or accusations, but quietly, methodically. I went upstairs, sat on our bed's edge, and stared at my reflection in the vanity mirror. My lipstick had faded, a wisp of hair had come undone. I looked tired, older than I remembered. Downstairs, they laughed without me. The music played on. I didn't cry. Instead, I felt something shift deep inside. Not rage, not sorrow, but something colder, clearer, like a branch snapping in winter. Later, after the guests left and Elliot watched TV in the living room with a glass of scotch, I asked calmly, "Why did you say that today in front of everyone?" He barely looked up. "It was a joke, Eleanor. Stop taking everything so personally." That phrase again, so personally. I nodded. That night, I slept in the guest room, claiming a headache. He didn't ask questions, didn't check on me. He was already gone, just not officially. What I didn't realize then was that this moment, this small act of public cruelty dressed in laughter, would be the turning point. The line I couldn't unsee. The joke they laughed at, but I couldn't forget. It was when I realized the man I'd built a life with no longer respected me and hadn't for a long time. It didn't end with a fight. It ended with silence. The day Elliot asked me to leave, or rather, suggested it, was ordinary in every other way. The sky was clear, the coffee brewed on time, the neighbor's dog barked as always. I was folding laundry, humming, when he entered and said it as casually as mentioning low milk. "I think it'd be better for both of us if we had some space." I froze, holding one of his pressed shirts. My heart didn't break, not because it wasn't painful, but because I'd subconsciously braced for it over the past year. Still, hearing it aloud was like swallowing glass. "Space," I repeated. "You want me to move out?" He shrugged. "It doesn't have to be dramatic, Eleanor. We're in different places. We're not connecting anymore. We've been living separate lives for a while now." Separate lives. He didn't say he loved someone else, though I knew. He didn't say her name, but I sometimes smelled her perfume on his coat, a cheap floral musk I'd never wear. He offered no regret, no anger, just detachment, like ending a lease. The girls weren't home. Leela had moved in with Caleb. Nora was at college. No one witnessed the moment my marriage dissolved. No audience to plead with, no daughters to explain to. Just us, in the house we built, surrounded by pieces of a life we'd stopped tending. I nodded slowly. Okay, I said. I didn't argue, beg, scream, or throw anything. The calmness surprised me. After years of being ignored, overlooked, erased, I lacked the energy to perform heartbreak for someone who'd stopped seeing me. In the days that followed, I packed carefully. Not because I took much, but because I refused to leave in chaos. I boxed photo albums, my mother's cookbook, my easel, and brushes. I left the wedding album, the crystal vases from anniversaries, the expensive cookware unused for family holidays that never happened. When I told the girls, their reactions split. Leela, ever her father's daughter, seemed unsurprised. Are you sure this is best, Mom? She asked. You always seemed frustrated. Frustrated, as if my grief were a mood. Nora cried, saying she never saw it coming, thought it was a rough patch. I didn't correct her. It wasn't her fault she missed the signs. Her father was skilled at disguising absence as busyness. Within a week, I signed a lease on a modest condo in Ashwood. It was nothing like our Fairhaven home, smaller, quieter, with outdated carpet and peeling hallway wallpaper. But it was mine. For the first time in decades, the silence wasn't heavy with disappointment. It was clean, untouched. Some days, I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, wondering what those years meant. If I'd wasted my best decades loving someone who never truly loved me back. If I stayed too long out of duty, fear, or hope that the man I married would return. Other days, I felt something stirring beneath the grief. Not joy, not yet, but space. Space to breathe, think, remember who I'd been before my life became an extension of someone else's ambition. I didn't tell many what happened, not from shame, but because I didn't want to justify my choice to those who never asked about my pain. Let them think I walked away on a whim, that I was too sensitive, too cold, too complicated. The truth was simple. I left because staying was another way of disappearing, and I wasn't ready to vanish. Rock bottom doesn't always look like a dramatic fall. Sometimes it's a quiet place, a lonely grocery aisle where no one sees you crying by the soup cans, a cold kitchen with one coffee mug in the drying rack, a voicemail never returned. That's where I lived for the first 8 months after leaving Elliot. The Ashwood condo was small, just one bedroom and an old radiator that clanged like a rusty bell at night. It was the kind of place where pipes groaned louder than thoughts, yet silence found a way in. I decorated with what little I brought, framed photos of the girls when young, second-hand furniture, a small collection of ceramic doves from a thrift store to fill empty shelves. But nothing filled the ache in my chest. Waking up was hardest. I'd forget for a second I was alone, reach across the bed to touch cool, empty sheets where Elliot used to be. Even in those final years when he barely looked at me, the absence had weight. When reality sank in, it didn't hit like a punch. It leaked like water through a cracked ceiling, slow, relentless. The girls called occasionally, mostly Nora. Leela's calls were brief, hollow check-ins to fulfill obligation. Just seeing how you're settling in, Mom. I'd lie, saying everything was fine, that I loved the freedom, that I'd started painting again. None of it was true yet. I took a part-time job as a receptionist at a dental clinic downtown. The pay wasn't great, but it kept me afloat. I filed charts, scheduled cleanings, smiled like I had a reason. The other women were polite, but I didn't make friends. I felt old around them, not from age, but from the grief I carried like an invisible weight. It made me heavy in ways they didn't understand. Some nights, I didn't eat. Some nights, I fell asleep on the couch with the TV playing reruns to avoid the empty bedroom. Some nights, I opened old albums, running fingers over photos that once meant something. A Christmas morning, a school play, Elliot and me on our honeymoon. We looked happy. Maybe we were. Or maybe I didn't know better. The hardest day came when I saw Elliot's photo online. During a lunch break, scrolling a local news site, his face appeared. Carver and Marsh Realty sponsors annual charity gala. There he was, arm around Sylvia, both smiling like a political couple. She wore that artificial pink lipstick, like melted candy. And there, beside them, were Leela and Nora. It was like being erased in real time. A new family photo without me, a glossy image proclaiming, "We are complete. We are happy. We've moved on." I barely made it to the clinic bathroom before breaking down, sitting on the stall floor, knees to chest, weeping into my sleeves. I wasn't crying because I missed Elliot. I was crying because no one else did. No one seemed to notice I was gone. I'd built my life around others' needs, and when I stopped serving that role, I disappeared. I wish I could say that moment brought clarity. That I wiped my tears and vowed to rise like a phoenix. But that's not how it works, not at first. Instead, I went home, curled under a thrifted quilt, and whispered, "You're still here," over and over, as if convincing myself I hadn't died with the marriage. Rock bottom wasn't a bang. It was a long, low echo that made me question if I'd ever existed outside what I gave others. But sometimes, when you're buried that deep, you feel the ground under your feet again. That, I'd learn, was the beginning of something I hadn't felt in years: stillness. And in stillness, things grow. It happened on a Tuesday, an unremarkable day you expect to forget. I took the afternoon off from the clinic to sort through old boxes in the condo's storage closet, not with plans, but because clutter suffocated me in ways I couldn't explain. I needed to see what I was still carrying, literally and otherwise. The boxes were labeled in faded marker: kitchen, photos, Eleanor studio, and one simply marked, Simon. That one stopped me. My brother Simon had passed the previous year from a heart attack. He was the only family who truly checked on me during the divorce. While others looked away, Simon asked real questions, listened without judgment. When Elliot left, Simon arrived with groceries, wine, and a single sentence that still echoed: "You were always more than just his wife." I pulled the box down and carried it to the dining table. It held tools, a few flannel shirts, and sketches of an unfinished woodworking project. At the bottom was a yellow envelope, slightly bent, with my name in his handwriting. "Eleanor, read when you're ready." My heart pounded. I hesitated, holding it like it might shatter. Inside was a short letter and a folded, older paper, creased from multiple openings. I read Simon's note first. "Sis, I found this while cleaning out the house after your divorce. I wasn't sure when to give it to you. You looked so broken then. I didn't want to make it worse, but I knew this wasn't mine to keep. You deserve the truth. All of it. Simon." I unfolded the second sheet. A letter from Elliot, unaddressed, unstamped, never mailed. Perhaps he wrote it but lacked the courage to send it. The ink had faded, but the words remained sharp. I read slowly, my eyes trembling over each line. "Eleanor, if you're reading this, it means I never found the courage to say it aloud. I've done things I can't undo, but leaving you the way I did keeps me awake at night. I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. I left because I hated the man I'd become, and you reminded me of who I used to be. You never asked for anything, yet I made you carry everything. You gave me a home, 2 beautiful daughters, a life I didn't deserve, and I repaid you with silence, absence, shame. Sylvia didn't save me, she just didn't know me well enough to see how far I'd fallen. You did, and that scared me. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to know you were never the problem. You were always the best part of my life." I sat in silence, the letter resting like a ghost's confession. My eyes welled, but I didn't cry right away. I stared out the window at the grey sky, watching the wind bend the trees. Deep in my chest, something cracked open. All these years, I thought I'd been invisible, disposable, left behind because I wasn't enough. Here he was, admitting what I'd suspected but never dared believe: it wasn't me. It had never been me. I held that letter like a fragile artifact from another life, because it was. It didn't change the past or fix the scars, but it shaped a truth I could carry forward, untainted by gaslighting, mockery, or silence. I placed the letter in a small wooden frame and set it on my bookshelf. Not to honor Elliot, but as a marker. A line in the sand saying, "This is where the story begins to change." That night, I picked up a paintbrush for the first time in years. Not to impress, not to be good, just to feel something move through me that was mine alone. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was becoming someone again. Something shifted after that letter, not all at once. I didn't leap out of bed the next morning with purpose or glow with clarity. But piece by piece, I saw things differently. The fog that had wrapped my life began to lift. Not in dramatic gusts, but in slow, quiet wisps. I started waking earlier, not because I had to, but because I wanted to feel the morning's stillness. I'd open the windows, breathe Ashwood's salty air, and listen to birds, traffic, myself. The silence that once haunted me became space. Space to grow, think, reclaim parts of me buried under years of being his wife, their mother, the quiet one in the background. That framed letter sat on my bookshelf, not as a monument to Eliot's regret, but as a reminder I hadn't imagined my worth. It was always there. He simply failed to recognize it until too late. Now, with it in writing, with proof my love hadn't been foolish or wasted, something inside hardened, not bitterly, but firmly. A foundation was rebuilding. I began journaling again. The words came slowly, clumsily at first, then poured out in unfiltered streams. I wrote about my childhood, my marriage, my girls, the joys I'd claimed before they were forgotten. In those pages, I began to re-emerge, not as someone surviving, but as someone ready to begin. I stopped coloring my hair, a small act, but for me, liberation. For decades, I'd erased grey, chasing youth for a man now buried in the suit he wore to court me. I let the silver show and, to my surprise, liked it. It didn't make me look older. It made me look real, honest, unhidden. On weekends, I returned to the community center's art studio where I'd volunteered. The first day, the scent of paint and clay nearly brought tears. I hadn't realized how much I missed the messiness, the trial and error, the act of creating something that didn't need to be perfect, just mine. I started teaching a small watercolor class for women over 60. Most came not to become artists, but to feel they mattered, to be seen. We laughed, cried sometimes, shared stories between brushstrokes, and in their company, I remembered what it meant to belong. I also started saying no, a lot. No to Leela when she called, asking me to visit but making it clear Sylvia would be there. No to Nora when she tried to play peacekeeper, gently urging me to be kinder to their father's memory. No to old friends who wanted gossip, not truth. Boundaries became my armor. Not walls to keep people out, but gates I controlled. Who entered, who stayed, who no longer had access. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt the same way. A new feeling bloomed beneath my ribs. Something softer, deeper, power. Not from revenge or recognition, but from surviving, from knowing who I was after everything that tried to erase me failed. One morning, I stood before my bathroom mirror and said aloud, "You're still here." For the first time, I believed it. I wasn't defined by what Eliot did or didn't give me. I wasn't the woman they pitied, whispered about, overlooked. I was Eleanor Prescott, 65, silver-haired, paint-stained, unbroken, and just getting started. After the awakening came stillness, not the lonely stillness of the condo months before, but a new kind. Focused, intentional, a stillness with purpose. I didn't tell anyone about the letter. Not my daughters, not the few friends I'd reconnected with at the art center. That letter from Eliot was mine. I didn't want to spend my next chapter interpreting his guilt or letting anyone minimize it. Instead, I planned, not for revenge, not for recognition, but for ownership of my life, my time, what I'd quietly given up and now felt ready to reclaim. It began with paperwork. I dusted off old folders, reviewing every legal and financial document one by one. Bank accounts, insurance policies, joint assets not fully transferred after the divorce. Things I'd avoided because they felt too heavy. This time, I tackled them like a woman with a flashlight in a dark tunnel. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was awake. I contacted an old friend of Simon's, Roger Bennett, a retired estate lawyer who used to fish with my brother. Roger remembered me instantly. "Simon always said you had more grit than anyone he knew," he told me, pouring coffee across his kitchen table. I smiled, recalling Simon calling me the strong one, even when I didn't believe it. Roger helped me quietly review Eliot's estate. To my surprise and confusion, several sealed documents remained in legal limbo due to changes Eliot made to his will shortly before his death. Sylvia had contested them, but certain provisions were protected. Roger explained that Eliot created a trust in my name 8 months before he passed, under a separate legal entity. Most wouldn't have noticed unless they knew where to look. Why would he do that? I asked. Roger paused. I think he was trying to do right by you, quietly and too late. It wasn't validation. It didn't erase what he'd done, but it gave me leverage. Not for power over others, but over myself, financially, legally, emotionally. I used the funds to settle into a slightly larger apartment, still modest, still mine. I donated half my old clothes, sold the jewelry Elliot gave me, pieces that had grown cold on my skin, and kept only one item, the wedding band I no longer wore. I placed it in a small wooden box with Simon's letter and Elliot's confession, a time capsule of closure. I started morning walks before sunrise. The world felt untouched then, unbothered. It gave me time to think clearly, plan, let go, breathe. During those walks, I made quiet decisions. To leave the past behind, to stop repairing relationships that only reached out when they needed something, to build something new. I enrolled in a community leadership course, something I'd wanted when the girls were young, but Elliot called a waste of time. The first week, I introduced myself not as a divorcee, mother, or widow. I said, I'm Eleanor. I teach art. I'm learning to rebuild. It felt true. I didn't post on social media, didn't update the girls on every change, didn't tell Sylvia, Elliot's old friends, or Fairhaven neighbors who sent awkward holiday cards. I let silence do the work. That's the thing about healing. Sometimes the loudest power makes no sound at all. No announcements, no warnings, just slow, deliberate steps in a direction no one saw coming. By the time Elliot's estate was settled and his will scheduled for final reading, I'd made peace with needing nothing from him. Yet I had a distinct feeling what came next would turn more heads than anything he gave me when alive. They didn't notice the shift at first, and that's how I wanted it. From the outside, I was still Eleanor Prescott, the quiet ex-wife who vanished after the divorce. The woman whose name hadn't been spoken much in recent years. I hadn't made a scene, demanded anything, or attended Elliot's retirement party, though invited, likely out of obligation. I was invisible to most, and they'd grown comfortable with that. But slowly, that comfort cracked. It started with calls from Elliot's legal team, specifically the estate executor, Nathan Wells, Elliot's attorney for nearly 15 years. He reached out politely, with growing urgency. Apparently, Elliot made last-minute amendments to his will, and due to complex trust accounts in my name, I was legally required to attend the final reading. I agreed, saying little. What Nathan didn't know was that I already knew the trust's contents. Roger had reviewed the paperwork weeks earlier. I knew about the Fairhaven house, the one Elliot and I bought before he signed it over to Sylvia post-divorce. I knew about the sizable art fund named after me, a tribute, per the documents, to the creative spirit who made a home from struggle. I even knew he'd written explicit instructions that Sylvia and the girls' provisions wouldn't override my rights to those assets. None of them knew. That was the shift. Power returned to me, not as a weapon, but as quiet knowledge. I didn't need to argue or fight. I had truth and time on my side. The second sign came from Leela. She called one evening, her tone softer than in years. Hey, Mom, just checking in. I heard from Dad's lawyer you're going to the will reading. I heard the hesitation, the faint confusion. For so long, they'd believed the narrative Sylvia and Elliot fed them. That I was distant, cold, too emotional to hold the family together. Now, things weren't adding up. Yes, I'll be there, I replied simply. Silence. Okay. I just wasn't expecting that. I wasn't expecting a lot of things, Leela. It wasn't spiteful, it was true. The next shift came with Sylvia. I received a handwritten letter, surprising me. It was brief, defensive, cloaked in civility. Eleanor, I'm sure this has been overwhelming. I want to make it clear that whatever arrangements Elliot made were his decision. I hope we can behave appropriately at the reading and avoid tension. Sylvia, asking me to be civil. The same woman who stood at my husband's funeral, hand on his chest like a trophy, now asked for civility. It almost made me laugh. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, not from pettiness, but as a reminder of how quickly certainty becomes insecurity. Behind the scenes, word spread. A former neighbor, Beatrice, texted out of the blue, heard you might be inheriting the Fairhaven house. Good for you, Eleanor. No one deserved it more. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. People who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly remembered my number. Polite inquiries, offers to catch up, thinly veiled questions about the estate. That's the thing about quiet women. They don't stay invisible forever, especially when the structure that erased them collapses. By the time the will reading was scheduled, I'd gathered my composure like a tailored coat. I'd walk into that room not to take from anyone, but to reclaim what was always mine. I didn't want applause. I didn't want drama. I wanted the truth heard aloud before everyone who'd whispered behind my back. And whether they liked it or not, they'd listen. The room was smaller than expected. A modest conference room at Wells and Bennett's law offices, with beige carpeting, stiff leather chairs, and a long oval table polished to a dull shine. It smelled of lemon disinfectant and old paper. There was no drama, no grand oak-paneled hall, just controlled tension settling like dust. When I walked in, no one stood or greeted me. Sylvia sat at the table's head, lips tight, in a black blazer-like armor. Leela was beside her, flipping through her phone but not really looking. Nora sat aside, hands clasped, eyes darting to me, then away. I took a seat across from them without a word, placing my purse gently on the floor. My spine was straight, hands still. Nathan Wells entered, carrying a thick folder. "Good afternoon," he said, setting his materials down. "Thank you for coming. As you know, this is the final reading of Elliot Carver's last will and testament." I watched Sylvia. Her nails tapped the table in a steady, restless rhythm. She hadn't expected me to come, I could tell. Maybe she thought I'd forfeit it all to avoid discomfort, as I'd always swallowed my pain before. But today wasn't for her comfort. Nathan read the standard preamble. Legal formalities, statements of sound mind, revocation of prior wills. I felt everyone shifting, impatient, waiting for the part they came for. Then came the turn. In accordance with the decedent's final amendment, dated April 12th, the following assets are to be distributed as outlined. Sylvia straightened, Leela stopped fidgeting. To Miss Eleanor Prescott, the Fairhaven property at 1428 Maplewood Lane, fully deeded with no liens. The estate's mortgage was paid in full by the decedent prior to his passing. Gasps. Audible ones. Leela blinked. Nora's mouth opened slightly. Sylvia's face didn't move, but her knuckles whitened. Nathan continued. Additionally, to Miss Prescott, the Elliot Carver Creative Arts Fund, established to support underrepresented women over 60 in artistic careers, is to be managed in her name. This fund, valued at $750,000, is non-transferable and not subject to contest. Sylvia's voice cracked like ice. There must be a mistake. Nathan didn't blink. All documents are valid and notarized. The trust was reviewed by our office and the probate court. Silence swept the room like a tide, pulling everything under. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Then Nathan pulled out a letter, not from the will, but a personal note. The decedent also left a statement addressed to the room. "With your permission, I'd like to read it." No one objected. He unfolded the paper and read, "If you're hearing this, I'm gone. And if Eleanor is here, she's stronger than I ever gave her credit for, though I always knew it. To those surprised by what I've done, understand this. I made choices I regret. I left behind someone who built me, who believed in me before I believed in myself. Sylvia, I thank you for being there in my final years, but you came after the foundation was laid. Leela, Nora, your mother gave up more than you'll ever fully understand. If you're angry today, sit with that anger, then look at the woman across from you. She deserves everything I couldn't give her when it mattered. I hope this gives back some of what I took." Nathan folded the letter and placed it back in the file. The room stayed still. No one moved, not even the air. I looked at my daughters, one teetering on defensiveness, the other overwhelmed by guilt. I didn't gloat or cry. I simply said, I didn't come for a fight. I came to close a chapter I never got to finish. Sylvia stood abruptly, gathering her things without a word, heels clicking down the hall like a retreating army. Leela stared after her. Nora finally looked at me, really looked, and gave the smallest nod. I stood, thanked Nathan quietly, and walked out. The story had finally been told, not by me, but by the man who once tried to silence me. There was nothing left to prove. I thought the will's final reading would end it. The truth was spoken. Elliot had, in his last breath, made amends, or tried. I left that law office with a peace I hadn't felt in decades. But justice lingers, like a bell's echo long after it's rung. Sometimes, the final blow comes when no one sees it coming, not even you. A week later, I returned to the Fairhaven house. I hadn't stepped foot in it since leaving 12 years earlier, suitcase in one hand, dignity in the other. The key turned easily. Inside, everything seemed smaller. The furniture had changed, the curtains were different, but the bones remained. The hardwood floors, the molding we painted, the tiny scuff marks from Nora's roller skates. I walked through slowly, like a museum of a life that once belonged to someone else. On the mantel was a photo of Elliot and Sylvia at a charity gala, in a silver frame. She wore pearls. He looked tired. I took it down, not from spite, but because it didn't belong anymore. This house, once a symbol of my silence, was mine again, not as a consolation, but as something I'd built, lost, and reclaimed on my terms. The next morning, Roger Bennett called. You might want to sit down. Sylvia had filed an emergency injunction to block the trust fund transfer, claiming emotional duress, undue influence, and that I'd manipulated Elliot in his final days. It was baseless, desperate, and failed. The court dismissed her petition in under 48 hours, citing clear documentation, notarized confirmations, and statements from Elliot's physician affirming his sound mind. But that wasn't the twist. Roger continued. During the review, the court uncovered something else, an account in Leela and Nora's names, set to release at his death. It's frozen now. Why? I asked, confused. Because it was funded by a portfolio Elliot never disclosed in the divorce settlement. Assets that should have been divided, meaning, Eleanor, they technically belong to you. I sat stunned. Elliot had hidden assets. Stocks, property shares, a small investment firm opened in a partner's name to stay off the books. He'd funneled profits into accounts for his daughters, ensuring Sylvia saw none of it. It was buried so deep even his primary attorney didn't know until probate flagged inconsistencies. What does that mean? I asked. You're entitled to claim them. Not just the trust or house, but the full portfolio. Estimated value? Roger hesitated. About $2.1 million. It was surreal, not for the money, but for what it meant. For years, I believed I'd left with nothing, accepted it, made peace with building from scratch. Now, I stood at the center of a narrative I didn't write, where the man who walked out left me the keys to a kingdom he thought I'd never touch. I didn't gloat or run to my daughters shouting, "I told you so." Instead, I redirected a portion of the funds into scholarships under Simon's name, quietly, without fanfare. I kept the rest, not for revenge, but for repair, not to relive what was lost, but to live differently moving forward. Sylvia never called. She packed up and left Fairhaven within the month. Leela texted, "I don't know what to say. I didn't know any of this." I replied, "I know you didn't. I'm not angry anymore. Because I wasn't. The final justice wasn't the money or victory. It was restoring my voice, my worth, the undeniable truth I'd never been lost. They just finally saw what was true all along." A few weeks after the court ruling, I was in the Fairhaven house, barefoot in the garden, pruning lilacs I'd planted 25 years ago. They were stubborn, wilted, but not dead, much like me, I suppose. With time, water, attention, even forgotten things can bloom again. That's when Nora arrived. I heard her car door before I saw her. She didn't call or text, just drove up and parked like she used to after school, needing to talk about something too big for the phone. I wiped my hands on my apron and opened the side gate. She stood there, arms crossed, a little lost. "Hey," she said quietly. "Hey," I replied, my voice steady. I didn't rush to hug her. I waited. "I was hoping we could snape," she said. "I know I should have come sooner." I nodded, motioning to the porch. "Let's sit." We settled onto the old wicker bench Elliot and I picked at a flea market. The cushion sagged, but it held. Nora looked thinner, more tired than last time. Her makeup was minimal. She had her father's eyes, but today they searched, uncertain. "I didn't know everything, Mom," she said, her voice cracking slightly. Not about the will, what Dad left you, or how things really ended. I know, I said gently. You weren't supposed to. She looked startled. What do you mean? You were a child, Nora. Even when you thought you were old enough, you were fed a version of the truth by people protecting their side. She lowered her eyes. I believed him. I believed Sylvia. I thought you gave up. That stung, but I let it pass. I'd made peace with them rewriting me as disposable to accept Sylvia. It wasn't personal, it was survival. Now, they were waking to the truth in pieces. Nora picked at her sleeve, then asked what she'd been carrying. Why didn't you tell us your side? I looked at the garden. Because you wouldn't have heard me then, and I didn't want to be the mother who turned her children into weapons. I didn't want you to feel you had to choose. Tears welled in her eyes. I'm sorry for not asking, for not being there when you needed me. I placed my hand over hers, smaller, softer than I remembered. I needed to be there for myself first, I said. And I was. That's why I'm still standing. She laughed softly through tears. You're more than standing. You're thriving. I smiled but said nothing. I didn't need validation or apology. Her presence, genuine, was enough. I don't know if Leela will come around, she said after a while. She's proud, angry. She feels Dad lied to her and doesn't know where to put that. She'll figure it out, I said. Or she won't. But that's hers to carry, not mine. We sat long, letting silence stretch without tension. Nora shared about her job, her new apartment, a relationship she was unsure about. I listened, not desperate to be included, but comfortable in my own skin. As the sun dipped, Nora asked, "Can I come by again, just to visit?" "Maybe paint with you." "Of course," I said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "But this time, you do the talking." She smiled. Deal. It wasn't a fairy tale reunion. No violins, no sweeping embraces, no Instagram-worthy selfies of mother and daughter healing in golden light. But it was real, and real was enough. As she pulled out, I stood in the doorway, hand on the frame, realizing something quietly powerful. I no longer needed my daughters to understand my story to feel whole. They were welcome, but I didn't need their approval to live it. It was a Sunday morning when I finally allowed myself stillness, not from exhaustion or emptiness, but from peace. Real peace, the kind that accumulates after months of steady choices. Sunlight filtered through lace curtains in my new reading room, a sunlit corner converted from the Fairhaven house's old guest bedroom. I'd painted the walls soft sage green, hung my watercolors, and placed a cozy armchair by the window. Faint jazz played from a record, and on my lap was steaming black tea. No phone, no TV, just the world humming gently outside. On the side table sat three things: the framed letter from Elliot, a photo of Simon holding a fish he bragged was bigger than it was, and a nearly full leather-bound journal where I'd written every detail of this strange, painful, liberating chapter. Healing doesn't erase everything. The scars remain. I still recall Elliot's voice dismissing me, the hollow ache of being forgotten by my children, the crushing quiet of that first night in Ashwood. But those memories are like old photos, real, part of my story, but no longer able to hurt. I entered this house 15 years ago as a wife trying to hold a family together. I left stripped to survival. Now, I'd returned, not to reclaim what was lost, but to honor the woman who made it through. There was no revenge, no bitterness, just gratitude for the truth, even if it came late. Elliot didn't see me rise, but maybe that's how it was meant to be. His last gesture wasn't redemption, it was confession. That confession gave back the space I'd been denied. I used part of the inheritance to launch the Simon Prescott Scholarship for Creative Women over 60. It still makes me smile, thinking of the first recipient's face. I imagined Simon rolling his eyes, muttering about sentimental nonsense, even as he beamed with pride. The rest I used to build something quiet, sustainable. A life not flashy, but full. I taught art 4 times a week at the community center, held weekend workshops in the Fairhaven house. Sometimes 12 women came, sometimes 3, but each brought a story. Together, we turned pain into pigment, silence into expression. Leela hasn't called. I don't expect her to. Some need longer to rewrite the stories they were told, some never do. That's no longer my burden. Nora visits every other weekend. We paint, talk about life, walk the streets where she once rode her bike in pigtails. She never said, "I'm sorry," again. She didn't need to. Her presence is apology enough. One evening after class, I stayed in the art studio. The others had gone, and the building glowed golden. I stood before a large blank canvas, the kind that once intimidated me, now exciting. It reminded me of what was still possible. I dipped my brush in sapphire blue and painted without thinking. Broad strokes, unapologetic color, no outlines, no fear. It wasn't for display or approval, it was for me. The woman who gave everything and asked for nothing. The woman left behind who built a world from what remained. The woman who finally saw herself. As the light faded, I stepped back. The painting wasn't finished, nor did it need to be. Neither was I in that moment, surrounded by silence, strength, and the scent of turpentine. I understood the lesson I'd waited a lifetime to learn. You don't need justice to heal. You just need to remember who you are. As twilight settled over the Fairhaven house, I stood in the garden, the scent of lilacs mingling with the evening breeze. The canvas in my studio lay unfinished, a vibrant tapestry of sapphire and gold, each stroke a testament to a life reclaimed. Nora's laughter echoed from the porch, where we'd shared tea and stories, her visits weaving new threads into our bond. I no longer sought approval or justice. My heart was full with the quiet power of knowing who I was. The stars emerged, soft and steady, and as I gazed upward, I felt it. Peace, not as an end, but as a beginning. For the woman who had once been silenced now bloomed, like the stubborn flowers at my feet, radiant, unbroken, and forever growing toward the light.